Some of Terraria's most iconic weapons of all time come from the dungeon biome, but are dungeon weapons actually that good in Terraria? I thought it would be fun to go through every single dungeon weapon and briefly talk about how good they actually are. Of course, we're going to be taking into account both damage and enjoyability. Do the weapons actually do a lot against enemies and boss fights, and are they actually fun? First off, we have got the Water Bolt, one of Terraria's most iconic and arguably most popular weapons ever. I don't know if this is just me, but the Water Bolt has kind of fallen off for me over the years. Don't get me wrong, it's still a great weapon overall, and I think that it's a pretty enjoyable one, but I don't think it's quite amazing like it once was. This can be one of the best pre-hard mode weapons in the game if you're in a very closed off area where all of the little bolts get to jump around over and over again, but honestly, that doesn't really happen a lot. With that being said, it's still decently fun and it does a good amount of damage, and so I would say that it's a great weapon overall. Next up, we've got the handgun, and this one is not quite as good. The handgun does tremendously bad damage, even for a pre-hard mode weapon. On top of that, the weapon itself isn't even fun to use because it's just like any other gun in the game with no special abilities. Honestly, at the end of the day, I would say the handgun is pretty terrible. Now let's move on to a completely different type of weapon, the Aqua Scepter. I don't use this weapon all that much, so I wasn't expecting it to be that good, but after doing a lot of testing, honestly, this weapon's damage is insane. Obviously, it's a mage weapon, so it does lose some of that damage over time if you continue to use the weapon over and over again, but you can just look for yourself. Look at how much damage this weapon does. Weapons like this, which are designed to fight multiple enemies, are also extremely satisfying. And honestly, I think that the Aqua Scepter is one of Terraria's best pre-hard mode weapons, so overall, it is amazing. Moving on to the next pre-hard mode magic weapon, we've got the Magic Missile. The damage for this weapon is good. It's not the best, but it's not the worst. With that being said, I still love the Magic Missile, and I find it to be one of the most enjoyable weapons in the entire game. Obviously, you have control over every weapon in Terraria, but with a lot of projectiles like this, you don't have this much precision. It also has a pretty cool sound effect, and it looks kinda nice. It doesn't do the best damage, but I would still say that overall, it's a great weapon. And then we've got the Blue Moon. This is a mace weapon, so the damage is okay, but not the best. It does okay damage if you're close to an enemy, but if you're far away and you're fighting something like a boss fight, it's not gonna be the best weapon, or even close. In terms of how fun the weapon is as well, I would say that it's just okay. With all of that being said, the Blue Moon does still do okay damage, and it actually does great damage if you're close to an enemy, so overall, I would say that it's good. Now let's start talking about the one and only sword from the dungeon, the Muramasa. Everybody likes the Muramasa because it looks cool and it can be crafted into the Knight's Edge. But if you actually look at the damage and the enjoyability of the Muramasa, it's pretty rough. This isn't mentioning as well that you do have to be really close to an enemy to even attack it with the Muramasa, and unlike a lot of other pre-hard mode swords, it doesn't have a real projectile. You gotta kinda respect that it doesn't have a projectile because that gives it an extra challenge and makes it a little more enjoyable, but it's still pretty bad. Now let's move on to the last pre-hard mode weapon you can get from the dungeon, the Valor. The Valor is a yo-yo, so it's in a completely different category of weapon. Yo-yos in themselves never do great damage, but when paired with the right accessories, they can actually be pretty good. The enjoyability of the weapon itself is also pretty hard to judge because it's a yo-yo, and all yo-yos are basically the same. Both in terms of damage and enjoyability, I would say that the Valor is just okay. That's all for Terraria's pre-hard mode dungeon weapons. Some of them are bad, but most of them are honestly pretty good. Every major biome in Terraria has a unique hard mode chest with a guaranteed item inside of it. The first biome chest weapon in Terraria is the Piranha Gun, which you can get from the jungle chest. The Piranha Gun can shoot out a few piranhas, which do what you expect piranhas to do, which is latch onto enemies and bite at them constantly. The damage itself is actually pretty bad. Considering that you have to use this as your primary weapon 90% of the time, the amount of damage it does simply isn't worth it, especially after Plantera, which is when you unlock the weapon. It's also a very unenjoyable weapon because you don't really get to interact a lot. This has always been one of my least favorite weapons in the game, not just because the damage itself is bad, but also because it's not very enjoyable at all. Overall, I would say that the Piranha Gun is a terrible weapon. On the other hand, we have the Scourge of the Corruptor, which can be unlocked from, you guessed it, the Corruption chest. The Scourge of the Corruptor does great damage, and on top of that, it actually homes to enemies. Homing weapons are usually really fun in general because it gives you more time to dodge without taking away that interaction that makes you feel like you're in the fight. The Scourge of the Corruptor is super enjoyable to use, it has great damage, and overall, I would say it's great. Now it's time to talk about the Vampire Knives, which you can unlock through the Crimson chest. A lot of people have said over the years that this is the best weapon in the entire game, while others have said that it's actually pretty overrated. In terms of damage, yeah, it's not the best, but the lifesteal is super overpowered and cannot be overstated. If you optimize your built correctly, you can get better healing out of the vampire knives than out of actual healing potions. I don't think the vampire knives are very fun to use if I'm being completely honest, but that doesn't really change the fact that it is one of the best weapons in the entire game. I believe wholeheartedly that this is the best dungeon item in the entire game, and I think the vampire knives are amazing. Now it's time to talk about the rainbow gun, which you can get through a hollowed chest. This is one of my favorite weapons in Terraria, but I'm not going to make any excuses for it. The rainbow gun's damage is really bad. This weapon is only really viable when there's a horde of enemies coming at you from a very flat horizontal line, and you can use the rainbow gun to attack them, but that is such a niche use case that the weapon is basically useless. Because this is a support weapon and you can use other weapons at the exact same time, I would not say the rainbow gun is one of the worst weapons in Terraria, but regardless, it is still pretty bad. Moving on, let's start talking about the Staff of the Frost Hydra, which you can get from the ice chest. On the surface, the Staff of the Frost Hydra does pretty good damage, but the big problem is its accuracy is really bad, and it doesn't fire very often. Having it wait forever in between shots and have bad accuracy is just a horrible combination. The enjoyability is of course terrible because it's a summon weapon, and so you have no control over what it actually does. I honestly don't think the Staff of the Frost Hydra is the worst summoner weapon or anything like that, but I do think that it's bad. Moving on to another summon, let's talk about the Desert Tiger's Staff, which you can of course get from the Desert Chest. The damage from this weapon is good. It's a lot more reliable than the Staff of the Frost Hydra because it's an actual minion that locks onto enemies even if they're flying, and so you can guarantee that it'll at least do some good damage. Overall, I would say that the Desert Tiger's Staff is slightly better than mediocre and therefore is good. Next up, we've got the Key Brand. Oh yes. You would expect a weapon half as rare as the Rod of Discord to be pretty good, but the Key Brand is quite the opposite. The main problem is that you can only get the Key Brand after defeating Plantera when everything needs to be ranged, but the Key Brand has no projectile. The only reason you would ever use the Key Brand in combat is if you were doing a true melee challenge. The damage is great up close, but the range is absolutely horrible, and therefore the damage is really bad. As somebody who's never played Kingdom Hearts, I don't have any affinity for this weapon, and I doubt I ever will. Overall, it's pretty bad. The next weapon to cover is the Magnet Sphere. This weapon is dropped by the exact same enemies as the Key Brand, except it has a 1 in 300 chance instead of 1 in 200. The good news is that the Magnet Sphere is actually really good. This is everything that the Rainbow Gun should be. It's a really nice support weapon that doesn't do insane damage, but more than helps out during boss fights. Considering this weapon is support and you can use other weapons at the exact same time, I would say the damage is actually great. This is one of the only support weapons that I would actually consider using outside of the Summoner class in the entire game, and overall, I would say that the Magnet Sphere is great. Next up, we've got the Paladin's Hammer, which is of course dropped by the Paladin. The damage of this weapon is good, but not the greatest. It has a pretty short range, but it's not quite as short as most melee weapons. I think the real saving grace for the Paladin's Hammer is that it's one of the most fun weapons in the entire game. Every hit feels super powerful, you need to space yourself properly to not get hit, especially by boss fights, and fighting with the Paladin's Hammer is super rewarding. This weapon doesn't do great damage, but it is one of my favorite weapons in the game, and I think a lot of people will agree that it's really enjoyable. So I would say the Paladin's Hammer is great. Next up, we've got the Shadow Beam Staff. The damage itself is fine, especially if you're in a crowded room, kind of similar to the Water Bolt, but if you're out in the open, like you're usually gonna be, attacking a single target like a boss fight, the Shadow Beam Staff is really bad. Even against crowds of enemies, which is the best way to use the Shadow Beam Staff, it's nowhere near the best, especially at this stage of the game. Overall, I would say that it's just okay. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have our next weapon, the Spectre Staff. The damage itself is kind of similar to the Scourge of the Corruptor, in the sense that it's not really that good, but because it homes, it's very reliable. I think the homing attack of this weapon is super engaging. These are my favorite kind of weapons, not only in Terraria, but in combat video games in general, and because of that, I would say the Spectre Staff is great. Now let's move on and talk about the Inferno Fork. This weapon does pretty good damage, not just towards bosses, but also towards crowds of enemies. The vast majority of weapons in Terraria are either really good against invasions or really good against boss fights, whereas the Inferno Fork is kind of pretty good against both. It's a super enjoyable weapon because it rewards you for being accurate and has a really satisfying explosion when you hit enemies. It doesn't have spectacular damage or anything like that, and I do believe the Spectre Staff is a more fun weapon to use, but I still think the Inferno Fork is a pretty good weapon. Next up, we have the Sniper Rifle, which is of course dropped by skeleton snipers. This is another weapon that I used to think was really cool when I was early on in my Terraria journey, but nowadays I think is actually pretty mediocre. It's everything you would would expect from a sniper rifle. It does a whole lot of damage per attack, but it's extremely slow. Unfortunately, even if you land all of your shots with good bullets, the sniper rifle is not even close to being the best ranged option for post-Plantera Terraria. There are a lot of better options for ranged at this point in the game, which is a real shame because I think the sniper rifle should be really good. If I'm being completely honest, the sniper rifle is really fun to use though, so I would say that the sniper rifle overall is just okay. Moving on to a slightly better gun, we have the tactical shotgun. This weapon is literally just the boomstick, but for post-Plantera. Because this weapon is a shotgun, it'll do pretty great damage if you're close up to an enemy, but pretty bad damage if you're very far away. So I think it's fair to go in the middle here and say that the tactical shotgun does good damage, but not great damage. It's about as enjoyable as the sniper rifle. It's a fun gun to use, but nothing special. Overall, I would say that the tactical shotgun is pretty good. Moving on to the second and last yo-yo of the dungeon, let's talk about the Kraken. Earlier, I said it's important to judge yo-yos differently because most of them have really bad damage, but the Kraken is one of the exceptions to this. For a yo-yo weapon, I would say that the damage is great, and for a regular weapon, I would say that it's okay. I don't think it's very enjoyable because just like the Valor, it's a basic old yo-yo, but I don't think it's particularly boring to use either. Overall, I would honestly say the Kraken is a great weapon. One of our last weapons to talk about here is the Morning Star. Because Summoner is so complicated, there's actually some debate about whether the Morning Star is even worth getting over a weapon like the Kaleidoscope or the Dark Harvest, and that is a debate for another day. But judging the Morning Star in itself with summons, it's a great weapon. The damage is great, it has great range, the enjoyability is amazing because it's a whip, and there's nothing bad to really say about the Morning Star. Overall, it's an amazing weapon. Last but not least, let's talk about the final dungeon item, the Shadow Jousting Lance. I guess it's kind of a cool idea, weapons doing more damage based on how fast you're running, but the Shadow Jousting Lance is really more of a gimmick item than anything else. It's not fun to use at all because it has such a short range and doesn't feel satisfying to attack with, and the damage is pretty bad. Overall, I would say the Shadow Jousting Lance is a terrible weapon. And there you have it. If I did a tier list of every weapon, this is what it would look like, and join the Discord if you want to have discussions like this or give some video ideas. Alright, bye-bye.